Husband kicks his wife and child out of the house. She reopens her family's abandoned restaurant and becomes rich. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. The rain pelted down on Catherine Blake as she stood in the driveway of what was once her home. The sprawling mansion, the perfectly manicured lawns, and the luxury cars now seemed as distant as a dream. Her husband Matthew had kicked her out that morning, in front of their neighbors no less. His parting words echoed in her mind. "I found someone better." Those words cut deeper than she'd care to admit. The divorce had been swift, brutal, and one-sided. She was left with nothing but her suitcase, a modest alimony, and memories of a life that no longer existed. Catherine had been a devoted wife for years, following Matthew from one corporate party to the next, always the trophy on his arm. But now, standing alone, drenched and disoriented, she realized she had lost herself in the process. Her friends, Matthew's friends, had stopped calling, and her social life had withered away along with her marriage. She looked at her reflection in the window of her car, disheveled, defeated, and drenched to the bone. She couldn't stay in the city any longer. It was suffocating, and everywhere she went, she was reminded of what she had lost. But there was one place she hadn't thought about in years: her family's old seaside restaurant. The Oyster Cove, once a beloved spot in a small coastal town, had been abandoned after her parents passed away. She had left it behind, just like the small town and all of its simple, modest memories. But now it seemed like her only option. With a heavy heart and a sigh of defeat, Catherine packed her few belongings into her car and drove towards the town she had left behind so many years ago. The drive to the coast was long and filled with memories she tried to suppress. As she passed familiar landmarks, the fields where she played as a child, the old bridge she crossed with her parents to get to town, a mixture of nostalgia and regret welled up inside her. When she finally arrived, the sight of the Oyster Cove was both comforting and heartbreaking. The restaurant stood on the edge of the water, its once white paint now chipped and peeling, the windows boarded up, and the sign hanging crookedly from its rusted chain. It had been her family's pride and joy, but years of neglect had turned it into a shell of its former self. Catherine stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door. The wood groaned under her weight as she pushed it open, revealing a dark, dusty interior. The tables were still there, covered in dust and cobwebs. The smell of saltwater and decay filled the air, but beneath that was something else, an old familiar scent of fried seafood and her mother's famous chowder. She could almost hear the laughter of customers, the clinking of glasses, and the sizzle of food being prepared in the kitchen. But that was all gone now, replaced by silence and emptiness. For a moment, Catherine considered turning around, getting back in her car and leaving for good. But something inside her stirred, a flicker of hope or maybe defiance. This place had been her parents' dream, and for a time it had been hers too. Perhaps it could be again. The next few weeks were grueling. Catherine worked from sunrise to sunset, cleaning, repairing, and scrubbing every inch of the restaurant. The roof needed patching, the kitchen was outdated, and the dining room looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But as she worked, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. She wasn't just cleaning a building, she was rebuilding her life. As word spread through town that Catherine Blake was back and attempting to reopen the Oyster Cove, the locals were curious. Some stopped by to chat, offering words of encouragement, while others seemed skeptical. The town had changed since she'd left. New restaurants had opened, and tourism had become more competitive. People whispered that the Oyster Cove was a relic of the past, and Catherine was out of her depth. But she refused to let their doubts discourage her. She had lost everything once. She wasn't about to lose this. One evening, as Catherine was going through old boxes in the storage room, she found a folder filled with her parents' original recipes. Tears welled up in her eyes as she flipped through the handwritten pages, each one a reminder of the love and passion her parents had poured into the restaurant. These recipes were the heart and soul of the Oyster Cove, and they would be the key to its revival. With a renewed sense of purpose, Catherine dove headfirst into the restaurant's reopening. She rebranded the Oyster Cove as a seafood bistro, blending her parents' classic recipes with modern culinary trends. She hired a small but talented staff, focusing on sourcing local ingredients to create a farm-to-table experience. As the opening day approached, she was filled with both excitement and dread. What if no one came? What if she failed again? But when the day finally arrived, the restaurant was packed. The townspeople, eager to support one of their own, filled every table. The sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and sizzling seafood filled the air, just as it had in the old days. Catherine worked tirelessly in the kitchen, her hands moving with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. The food was a hit, and the reviews were glowing. But the real victory wasn't the full tables or the praise. It was the realization that she had done it. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes of her past. As the night came to a close, Catherine stood outside the restaurant, looking out over the water. The stars reflected in the waves, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She had come back to the place she had once run from, and in doing so, she had found herself again. But the journey was far from over. As the Oyster Cove's success grew, so did the challenges. Catherine's ex-husband Matthew had been keeping an eye on her progress, and he wasn't about to let her newfound success go unnoticed. Catherine woke up the morning after the grand reopening feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The reopening of the Oyster Cove had been a resounding success, far beyond what she had expected. The restaurant's tables were booked solid for the next 2 weeks, with locals and tourists alike clamoring to taste the new, modern twist on her parents' classic recipes. It felt like a dream come true, but she knew that this was just the beginning. The following months were a blur of hard work and sleepless nights. Catherine dedicated herself completely to the restaurant. She was in the kitchen early every morning and stayed late into the night, overseeing every detail of the operation. The pressure was intense, but she thrived on it. Each day brought new challenges, from balancing the budget to keeping the menu fresh, but the rewards were worth it. The Oyster Cove was becoming more than just a local success. It was gaining recognition far beyond the small coastal town. Articles about Catherine's story, a single mother rising from personal ruin to revive a forgotten family restaurant, began circulating online. Food bloggers visited and raved about the hidden gem on the coast, and soon regional publications picked up the story. Before she knew it, the Oyster Cove was listed as one of the top places to visit in the area. Catherine's hard work was paying off, and with it, her confidence soared. But success, as Catherine quickly learned, comes with its own set of complications. It started with an unexpected visit from her ex-husband Matthew. Catherine was in the middle of the dinner rush one evening when she saw him standing at the entrance, wearing his signature tailored suit, looking out of place among the rustic decor and casual diners. Her stomach dropped. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly as she met him at the door. "I was just in the area," Matthew said smoothly, flashing the smile that had once charmed her but now only irritated her. "Thought I'd check out the place. I've heard good things." Catherine didn't buy his casual act for a second. Matthew had never been just in the area in his life, and she knew his interest in the Oyster Cove was more than just curiosity. Still, she plastered on a polite smile. "We're busy, so if you're here to eat, you'll have to wait for a table. Otherwise, you know the way out." Matthew chuckled, unbothered by her hostility. "You've really turned this place around. Impressive, Catherine. I have to say, I didn't think you had it in you." The backhanded compliment stung, but Catherine refused to let him see that. You'd be surprised what people can accomplish when they're not being held back. For a moment, there was silence as they stared at each other. The tension between them was palpable, a mix of unresolved resentment and the unmistakable power shift in their dynamic. Catherine wasn't the woman Matthew had walked away from, and they both knew it. "I'll be in touch," Matthew said cryptically before turning to leave. "Good luck with everything." Catherine watched him go, her mind racing. She had worked so hard to build something new, something that was hers, and the last thing she needed was Matthew inserting himself back into her life. She had no doubt that he was up to something, but for now, she couldn't afford to focus on him. The restaurant was growing faster than she had anticipated, and it required all of her attention. As the Oyster Cove continued to expand its reputation, Catherine found herself navigating a new set of challenges, managing the influx of customers, maintaining the quality of the food, and ensuring her small team could keep up with the demand was overwhelming at times. But Catherine was determined. She hired more staff, brought in a consultant to help streamline the kitchen's operations, and even began planning for a second location. It was during one of these hectic days that Catherine received a phone call from a real estate developer interested in buying the land the Oyster Cove was built on. The offer was staggering, far more than the property's market value, and for a brief moment Catherine considered it. The money could secure her future and allow her to retire early. But the thought of selling the restaurant, of letting go of everything she had worked so hard to rebuild, made her stomach churn. "No, thank you," she told the developer firmly. "The restaurant isn't for sale." As soon as she hung up, she knew that the offer was more than just a random business opportunity. Something bigger was at play. Later that evening, as Catherine was closing up the restaurant, she found an envelope slipped under the door. It was from Matthew. Her heart raced as she opened it, bracing herself for whatever scheme he had concocted. Inside was a letter, formal, legal, and written in the cold language of property law. Matthew was contesting ownership of the Oyster Cove. He claimed that since they had been married when the property was abandoned, he was entitled to a portion of its value. Worse still, his lawyers were pushing for a settlement that would force Catherine to sell the restaurant, or at the very least, buy Matthew out at an exorbitant price. Fury boiled within Catherine. Matthew hadn't lifted a finger to help her when she had been kicked out with nothing, and now that she had built something from the ashes of her old life, he wanted a piece of it. She crumpled the letter in her hands, her mind racing with anger and frustration. But this wasn't just about money or revenge. This was about power, control, and the fact that Matthew couldn't stand to see her succeed without him. She knew she had a fight ahead of her. Over the next few weeks, Catherine threw herself into both the restaurant and the legal battle with Matthew. Every day was a whirlwind of meetings with her lawyer, shifts in the kitchen, and managing the restaurant's growing success. Her determination was unwavering, but the stress was beginning to take its toll. The legal battle dragged on, with Matthew's lawyers digging into every corner of her past, trying to find any weakness they could exploit. But Catherine refused to back down. This restaurant wasn't just a business. It was her second chance, her proof that she could survive and thrive on her own. She wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her, least of all the man who had abandoned her when she needed him most. The pressure mounted, but so did Catherine's resolve. She had come too far to let Matthew or anyone else take this away from her. She had built the Oyster Cove from nothing, and she would defend it with everything she had. One evening, as Catherine sat alone in the restaurant after hours, her lawyer called with an update. "I have good news," he said. "We've found a loophole." The words sent a wave of relief washing over Catherine. Her lawyer explained that while Matthew could technically contest the property, the deed had been transferred solely to her name after her parents' death. Since the Oyster Cove had been abandoned during their marriage, Matthew's claim was weak at best. They had a strong case to fight him off. For the first time in weeks, Catherine allowed herself to breathe. Catherine felt a sense of vindication as her lawyer detailed the loophole they had found. For the first time since Matthew had re-entered her life, she felt like the scales were tipping in her favor. The restaurant was thriving, her team was growing, and now, with this legal victory on the horizon, it felt like she was finally gaining control over every aspect of her life. But Catherine knew better than to relax too soon. Matthew was relentless, and even with the legal advantage, he wasn't likely to back down without a fight. Over the next few weeks, Catherine remained laser-focused on two things: expanding the Oyster Cove success and securing her victory over Matthew. She worked tirelessly, balancing her time between meetings with her legal team and running the restaurant. The stress was still immense, but Catherine had discovered something in herself that she hadn't known existed before: a relentless drive to succeed, not just for the sake of survival, but for her own sense of self-worth. She was no longer living in the shadow of her failed marriage. She was forging her own path. The final court date arrived sooner than expected. Catherine sat in the courtroom, dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, her heart pounding as the judge called the session to order. Matthew, sitting smugly with his high-priced lawyer, barely glanced her way. He still believed he had the upper hand, and that arrogance only fueled Catherine's determination. The proceedings dragged on, with Matthew's lawyer making every effort to paint Catherine as the bitter ex-wife trying to hoard what should be rightfully shared. But Catherine's legal team was prepared. They presented the deed, showing clear evidence that the Oyster Cove had been left to her alone, and highlighted the fact that Matthew had never shown any interest in the property until it became valuable. It didn't take long for the judge to see through Matthew's ploy. With a few sharp words, the judge ruled in Catherine's favor, dismissing Matthew's claim entirely. Catherine's heart leapt as the gavel came down, solidifying her victory. It was over. She had won. But as Catherine stood outside the courthouse, basking in the satisfaction of her hard-earned triumph, Matthew approached her, his face dark with resentment. "You think you've won, don't you?" he sneered. "This isn't over. You'll never be able to handle success, Catherine. You're still just the same scared little woman I left behind." Catherine's response was calm, measured. "Maybe I was that woman once. But I'm not anymore. And I'm not afraid of you." For the first time, Matthew's confidence faltered. He glared at her, but it was clear that he had lost more than just a court case. He had lost control. And for Catherine, that was the sweetest victory of all. With the legal battle behind her, Catherine threw herself fully into the restaurant, determined to build on the momentum she had gained. The success of the Oyster Cove continued to grow, and soon, Catherine began scouting locations for a second restaurant. She had plans, big plans, and nothing was going to hold her back anymore. As Catherine expanded her business, she started building connections with local farmers, fishermen, and artisans, creating a sustainable network that supported the community. Her restaurant became known not just for its excellent food but for its dedication to supporting local industries. Catherine's story, a single mother who had risen from the ashes of a failed marriage to become a thriving entrepreneur, was featured in magazines, on television, and across social media. People were inspired by her journey, and the Oyster Cove became a symbol of resilience and reinvention. But success didn't come without its challenges. Running a growing business while raising her 2 children was exhausting, and there were days when Catherine questioned whether she could keep it all together. The pressure of managing multiple restaurants, dealing with the ever-present media attention, and maintaining her personal life was overwhelming at times. But every time she thought about giving up, she reminded herself of how far she had come. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Catherine sat at the edge of the dock behind the Oyster Cove, looking out at the water as the sun dipped below the horizon. She had rebuilt everything from nothing: her life, her business, her sense of self. And though the path had been far from easy, she knew that every challenge she had faced had made her stronger. As the months passed, Catherine opened her second restaurant, Oyster Cove 2, in a nearby city. It was an instant success, attracting food critics and celebrities alike. Catherine's name became synonymous with quality and innovation, and she was soon regarded as one of the top restaurateurs in the region. Offers to partner with national restaurant chains and investors poured in, but Catherine wasn't interested in expanding too quickly. She had learned the value of building something slowly, with care and attention, and she wasn't about to lose sight of that now. Meanwhile, Matthew's life seemed to unravel. His new relationship fell apart, and his business ventures floundered. Catherine heard through mutual acquaintances that he had tried to invest in a series of high-risk ventures that had failed spectacularly, leaving him financially ruined. It seemed that, while Catherine had been rising, Matthew had been falling. And though Catherine took no pleasure in his downfall, she couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. He had tried to break her, and in the end, he had only broken himself. But Catherine wasn't focused on Matthew anymore. Her life was now filled with purpose, success, and love. She had found joy in her children, in her work, and in the community she had built around her restaurants. Every day, she woke up with a sense of gratitude for the life she had created, a life that, only a few years earlier, she could never have imagined. One evening, as Catherine was preparing to leave the Oyster Cove after a busy day, she noticed a familiar face in the crowd, an older man sitting quietly at a corner table. He smiled when their eyes met, and Catherine felt a flicker of recognition. It was David Marshall, the local real estate developer who had once offered to buy the land. Curious, she approached his table. "I see you decided not to sell after all," David said with a warm smile. Catherine laughed softly. "No, I didn't. And it seems like it was the right decision." David nodded. "It was. You've built something special here, Catherine. I knew you would." Catherine tilted her head, surprised by his words. "You knew." "I could tell," David said simply. "From the first time I saw this place, I knew it wasn't just a business to you. It was part of who you are." They talked for a while longer, and as Catherine listened to David speak about his admiration for what she had accomplished, she felt a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. There was a connection there, an understanding of what it meant to build something from the ground up. And as the night went on, Catherine realized that maybe, just maybe, there was room in her life for something more than just work. In the years that followed, Catherine continued to grow her restaurant empire, opening new locations and venturing into new culinary experiences. She had become a prominent figure in the industry, but more importantly, she had found peace in the life she had created. The small, scared woman who had been kicked out of her home and left with nothing was gone. In her place stood a confident, successful entrepreneur who had not only rebuilt her life but had discovered who she truly was along the way. Catherine Blake's story wasn't just one of success. It was a story of resilience, reinvention, and the power of believing in yourself, even when the world tries to tell you that you're not enough. And as she stood on the dock, looking out over the calm waters, she knew that this was only the beginning. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.